Thank you RC Racing Legends for giving me the idea for this video. Let's get started. This is a question that many people have struggled to answer for a very long time. All you have to do is Google this question and you'll be given a plethora of opinions and answers dating back to the early days of online forums and blogs. Here I am years later adding my opinion to the fire. It's also important to note that I'm only talking about RC racing, not bashing, crawling, or drifting, though you can still apply the rules I set in place to this video. Now before we begin, I'd like to remind you to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Without further delay, let's begin. Now, because people in RC tend to watch other sports in general, let's look at RC racing in comparison to those other sports and see what we can find. Now, comparing RC racing to, say, basketball or football is not really a thing you should do, and this leads us to our first roadblock in calling RC racing a sport. You see, the Oxford Dictionary defines a sport as an activity involving physical exertion and skill in which an individual or a team competes against another or others for entertainment. That's the tricky part, the physical exertion. Now, of course, marshalling would take some kind of physical exertion, but standing on a driver's stand while driving a toy car around a track isn't really going to get you in shape like playing a regular ball and stick sport would. Now, if we were to take this at face value, this would mean that no, RC racing is not a traditional sport. But that's not what we're going to do. Let's take a look at another form of competition, esports. Esports, if you didn't already know, is basically competitive gaming. If you were to compare it to RC racing, there's a lot of similarities between the two. There may not be any real physical exertion, but at least not the same way as, say, a stick and ball sport. But there is a lot of skill, talent, dedication, and general understanding that goes into competing at a top level in certain video games. The only main differences are the prize pools, look at this, and the amount of people getting paid to play. The number of people getting paid to compete at a top level in gaming is a lot higher than the number of people who get paid to race toy cars. Now, another comparison we can make, of course, is to other motorsports. The things that go into setting up an RC car for a track is actually quite similar to a full-size car if you want to boil it down to the basics. Suspension, roll center, aerodynamics, engine or motor tuning, and tire choice are all things you need to worry about when it comes to both full-size racing and RC racing as a whole. And that's just the basics. Of course, the price and prize pools of actually winning a race is nowhere near similar, but those tuning similarities are there and very much at the forefront of RC racing. Another similarity is the ability of top-level drivers to excel at talking with media without always sounding like a sales pitch, but also being approachable and helpful to other racers. When it comes to skill required to actually successfully drive a car around a track, many would think it'd be quite easy. Well, you'd be wrong in that respect. The amount of skill required to simply get around a track without crashing is actually quite high. To win races you need even more, and to compete at a top level you need to be able to turn record-touching lap over and over again without fail, all while knowing everyone else is doing the exact same thing. It's not easy. This skill doesn't come from nowhere, however. The amount of dedication that many top-level racers put into their craft is simply astounding. Hundreds of hours put into fine-tuning their car for their specific track, thousands to even tens of thousands of laps put into said track, learning every corner, jump, and imperfection. The amount of time put into RC racing at a top level is very similar to what other racing teams would do in other motorsports. And yes, I do mean teams. Yes, the teams may be a bit smaller, but they are still there. Let's take a look at nitro racing, for example. At a top level, you have an engine tuner, a pit crew, including the guy who does repairs and the one refueling during a long endurance race, which can go on for hours, by the way. And of course, you have the driver themselves. Now, of course, a lot of these jobs tend to overlap. Sometimes the one doing the engine tuning is also the one doing the pit stops, and the driver is the one doing repairs in the pits. It simply just depends. Speaking of teams, many people consider RC racing to be both a social and solitary activity, but that isn't entirely the truth. It's true that we all race against each other, but it's also an activity where we work together in many ways. Take for example any racing team. X-Ray, Mugen, S-Works, Team Associated, and Team Losi Racing All of them have a team of crack drivers all capable of winning big races, and all of them work together to make sure at least one of them does well. If one of them does well, or even wins, it's not just a win for that individual, but it's a win for the whole team. Or at least, that's how it should be. This doesn't just include team factory drivers at a top level. This also includes everything at a club level. How many times have you helped or been helped by someone at your local track? Whether it be that you need an extra motor or ESC, need tips on tire choices or setup, or even straight up letting you drive another's car to get an idea of how yours should handle. RC racing is a very inclusive activity that many people want you to compete in. Very few times will someone tell you to piss off when you ask them for help, and if they do that, they aren't worth your time. My point is, RC racing is a very social activity, and dare I say, motorsport. And that leads us to our original question. Is RC racing a sport? The answer is yesn't. For most people, including me, it's simply a hobby, something fun to do on the weekends, much like how I'd consider gaming a hobby. But for the best of the best out there, it may not be considered a traditional sport, but it very much can still be considered a motorsport. And if you consider motorsport a sport, then yes, it is a sport. It all simply depends on your level, and how much you're willing to put into it. That's all for now. If you liked my video and have your own opinion on whether or not RC racing is a sport, feel free to comment it down below. Also, be sure to check out my Patreon if you want to get up-to-date info on when my videos are coming out and their progress. Speaking of which, I'd like to thank my patrons Michael Williams, Lucas Starka, RC World Discord server, and Casey Nix. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.